Hello everyone, I'm Joe Cronin and welcome to The Toss-Up. The Super Bowl has been getting way too much love lately as, yeah, that's one of the only things going on in sports, but not really. We're talking about the NBA today. The All-Star break is approaching, there's new rules this season, and there's a stronger sense of rivalries. A lot to discuss across this association, so stick around and yes, buckle it up because we got a great show coming up on The Toss-Up. Whether it's the trade deadline that's going to happen before the show's even posted, the All-Star break, or Luka Doncic scoring the most points in a single game since 2006, the current state of the NBA has plenty to discuss, and here to join the discussion is Zion Brown, William McDermott, and Zach Browning, a great group of some basketball heads. And before we start, I have one trivia question. Dating back February 7th, that's the day we're airing this show, there's a major thing that happened in the NBA. A record was broken. Do you know what happened? February 7th in 2023. Silent.
Scoring record?
Yes.
LeBron James.
LeBron James. Also, shout out to an IU alum, Thomas Bryant. He was open on that play, but didn't give the ball. Thought I'd show him a little bit of love. But we'll get right into it. Like I said, the trade deadline is going to be happening right around the corner. And the first thing I have, who do you think is getting traded? There's already been some buzz happening in the past couple weeks. Obviously, Pascal Siakam has found a new home in Indy, OG, and Anunoby on the Knicks. But Zion, any other moves happening within the next really 24 hours?
Yeah, Joe, there's one name to me that really stands out that I think will be dealt, and that is DeJounte Murray of the Atlanta Hawks. He's a guy whose name has been in rumors. I think he's been linked a little bit to the Lakers, and he's one of those players. He's been around the league for about 8 years now. And he's got moved once already. I think he's getting moved again. The Hawks have not been as good as they thought they would be with DeJounte on the team. I think they're going to ship him, try go towards a new direction, and see if he's best somewhere else.
Are you worried that potentially teams might not be willing to ask for the haul the Hawks want in Murray? Because that's a great two-way player that DeJounte is. They
gave up a lot for him. I remember they gave up 3 first-round picks for him, so they're probably going to try to get at least 2 back, I would assume. So we'll see if a team is willing to give that up. But if you really feel like he's that extra piece to maybe get you over the edge, get you on top, I think it may be worth it.
Durham, any notable player getting traded within the next, like I said, 24 hours?
I'm thinking Miles Bridges of the Charlotte Hornets. I know there's been talks about him potentially going to Phoenix. Phoenix would have to give up a lot for him. Phoenix, a team that already is not very deep, and that's one of their biggest hindrances. But with the emergence of Bol and Grayson Allen having a solid year, definitely becomes more possible for them. I think Charlotte's going to try to get him out of the conference anyways. But I like the DeJounte pick. I just don't know if the Lakers are going to have enough to get the deal done.
Do you think the Suns would be willing to give up a guy like Allen who's kind of having a career year with his three-point shooting season?
I think he's off limits, but I think Bol is somebody that they could consider. And in terms of the Hornets, I think they've got to start from scratch. I think it's time to build around Brandon Miller. I don't think LaMelo Ball really has the leadership qualities or necessarily the on-court ability and presence, as he's hardly played at all the past 2 years, to be really a cornerstone of their franchise.
Well, at least his dad was a great internet personality back in 2016 when he said he
got him some clout.
Oh, yeah. Great time. What a time to be alive. Zach, anyone getting shipped here?
I'm going to go with a little bit of a cop-out here. I'm going to say one of 3 players on the Brooklyn Nets. You've got Royce O'Neal and Spencer Dinwiddie. Those are 2 expiring contracts that any contender would love to have on their roster. Then also Dorian Finney-Smith. He's not an expiring contract, but he's another guy. 3 and D. He can shoot the 3-ball. He's a big, long-wing defender that's athletic, can guard multiple positions. I think one of those 3 players on the Nets will go. The asking price shouldn't be too steep, although I have heard some rumblings that Dorian Finney-Smith has been looking for around 2 first-round picks, if not more, for Brooklyn in a trade that would send Dorian Finney-Smith elsewhere. So one of those 3 players on the Nets, whether it's Dinwiddie, whether it's Royce O'Neal, those are all guys that are big guards, big forwards that can defend and play on the offensive end.
We'll keep it with the trade so far. Zach, will go right back to you. What team do you think is in a need like this? They need something to kind of get them over the hump, get them in the hunt of the playoffs possibly within this backstretch of the season?
I'm going to go with the New York Knicks, and I'm going to go back to what Zion said earlier just a few moments ago with DeJounte Murray. I think DeJounte Murray is a guy who does need to get moved. I don't think he's fitting with Trae Young in Atlanta. And I think the Knicks are a perfect opportunity for him. They already brought in OG Anunoby earlier this deadline, and I think a backcourt pairing of Jalen Brunson and DeJounte Murray alongside OG Anunoby and Julius Randle, that's a team that elevates themselves from a player, a team that can make an Eastern Conference Finals, potentially at least, to a team that is a serious threat to win the Eastern Conference.
So you think they would make 2 moves like that in the same season?
I do.
There's
The
some big
only
moves.
issue is Atlanta's asking price is going to be steep.
My
I don't think
fear
that New York
is
can take
too,
that.
like moving Brunson away from the ball more. I'm not sure that will work out. We've seen how much he's thrived with Randall in kind of a more spot-up role.
I was wondering possibly maybe a guy coming off the bench for Brunson, a Jordan Clarkson. I was reading something earlier that potentially the Jazz could be shipping off from him. They're not really in the mix. Larry Markkanen's kind of the only one on that team stepping up at times. Do you see that as a potential? It's kind of an older veteran guy who can, he can score the rock.
I will say with Jordan Clarkson, if Emmanuel quickly didn't work out in New York, I don't think Jordan Clarkson would. He would. Jordan Clarkson's a guy, at this stage of his career, he wants to start. He wants to be a guy that can go take 15, 20 shots a game, and I don't think that happens in New York, especially after the Knicks couldn't find a spot on the rotation consistently to get those shots for Emmanuel quickly.
So Durham, I guess outside the Knicks, who else do you think possibly needs a trade?
I've got a few teams. I mentioned the Lakers and the Suns earlier. I think both of them need to make a trade, but I don't know if they can. A team that I think can and should is the Philadelphia 76ers. With the injury to Embiid, there's a lot of concern about them potentially falling out of the playoff picture and into the play-in with Embiid not likely to be back until April. That's worrisome for a 76ers team that has said all year long they've got to get healthy before the playoffs. If they're not even in the playoffs, you can't be healthy.
You've already seen within these past week that Embiid has been out, they're already starting to slip a little bit. I imagine they'll start to get their form back, and Tyrese Maxey is a good enough player to kind of lead you to some victories, but it'll be interesting what they do down the stretch. Zion, any team that needs to make a trade to boost their team.
The team I'm looking at is the Golden State Warriors. That is a team that, it sounds weird to say, they need some shooting right now on that roster. I mean, Klay Thompson, he's not making his shots. Steph is still Steph for the most part, but they need some extra help from the outside. I think a guy like Buddy Hield is someone that they could seriously look at, and he wouldn't even have to, he can meet his new team on Thursday because they play each other on the day of the trade deadline. So that's a possibility. I definitely feel like the Warriors, they need some sort of help. If they want to compete and contend the way that they are used to, they can't keep this current roster. Where they're at right now, they are not going anywhere. So if they really want to maybe make a push in the second half of the season, I think they need to make a move at the deadline.
It's always very interesting the way the deadline works. There's been a couple times where there are players actively at a game when a trade is announced. I think was it Harrison Barnes when he was on the Mavericks?
Yeah, he was on the
when
bench.
It was announced that he was going to the Kings, and now he's been there ever since. That's
Yeah.
something interesting like that. Want to transition a little bit. All-Star break is happening in a week. The All-Star game is in Indy. I think that's huge for the sport of basketball. I think it's huge for Indianapolis as a whole. But the first thing I want to talk about, I guess, just basic reactions to the team you see, any snubs that you saw. Zion, I'll go to you.
My main snub, and this, I don't know, this might be a hot take. James Harden, to me, has had an all-star caliber season. I know he missed the first maybe week or two with everything that was going on in Philadelphia, and they struggled at first when he got to the Clippers. But if you look at it since December, that team has been not good. The Clippers have been a great team, and James Harden, still at his age, has been the head of the snake. Obviously, Kawhi Leonard's the best player, but Harden's the one setting up and initiating the offense. He's got them in a really great place. I think he maybe should have made it over his teammate, Paul George, this year.
Really?
So I think James Harden has had that good of a season that, to me, he should have been an all-star yet again.
I mean, he did call his shot when they were struggling at first.
Yeah.
He said, you better watch out when we figure this out. And I was going to follow it up with, who do you think Harden would replace? And you think Paul George?
I do. I mean, it's neck and neck. Paul George has had a great year, but to me, when I watch the Clippers, when I look at that team, I feel like Harden is the more important piece to that squad than Paul George is.
Paul George is one of the smoothest players in the league, though. No love for
Harden
playoff
more
team.
important than
Yes.
PG.
Yes. You have
Wow.
an issue with that?
I just think on the defensive side, it really, I think PG carries his weight.
Durham, who do you think was snubbed from the All-Star team?
I think Domantas Sabonis was subbed. There's no reason Karl Anthony Towns should be an All-Star this season. Minnesota should never have 2 All-Stars, quite frankly, even if they're in first place. And Domantas Sabonis is having the best year of his career. No question, he should have been an
MVP
All-Star in
odds
the
right
front
now.
court.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw
How is that guy not an all-star? Doesn't make sense.
I was going to say possibly his teammate as well, De'Aaron Fox, putting up 28
as well, yeah.
I don't know how, what are they, 5th right now in the West, how they don't even have one. I think it's very interesting. Zach.
Those are the two guys that stood out to me, Fox and Sabonis, both on the Kings. If you are a team that's 9 games over 500, 5th in the Western Conference, that's been fantastic all season long, how do you not have at least one all-star? But the problem is, who would you take out? And I like Karl Anthony Towns. I think that's who I would take out and replace Sabonis with. Fox is a different story. You can't. It's hard to find a guard in the West that I would take out over Fox. Paul George might be the most likely candidate, but you look at guys like Luka, Shea, Devin Booker, you can't take those guys out. Those guys are locked in all-stars. So Fox, I'm a little bit more okay with, but Sabonis is definitely a snub.
Now, Durham, I am curious, I guess your thoughts with Jamal Murray not being named to the All-Star team. What are your thoughts with that?
Murray, he did not have the start to the year he wanted. He's been inconsistent. It's kind of a running joke that he only shows up against good teams. So if he doesn't play well against your team, I guess that means you're bad. Fortunately for Pacers fans, when he was here in Indy, he dropped a 30-piece. So that's good news for
fans
Indy, right? Up in Indianapolis. But no, I don't think he was deserving this year. I think, anytime a guy can turn it on in the playoffs like he can, though, he's always going to be a name people throw out there. For him, it's just finding a consistent level over the course of the regular season.
Can I just say the rosters need to be bigger? I think there's 15 players on actual NBA rosters.
But
why are there only 12
special? It's less
on the
special.
All-Star roster?
It can't be something you just handing out. No.
I think it's a good
flyers
thing.
on the corner of the street.
I think it's a good thing for the league that it's so hard to pick the All-Stars.
Yeah.
There's so much talent in the NBA.
I've seen something in the past couple years with the way that the talent has been elevated, and it's the loser of the All-Star game plays like an all-snub team. And obviously that's a pretty unrealistic thing to make happen. But do you think that could be potentially interesting? You see, maybe let's just say the East loses and they're playing, De'Aaron Fox, Domantas Sabonis, Jamal Murray, those guys. Is that something that would be interesting and possibly get a raise in viewership maybe just for the weekend? Or what they've done for All-Star Weekend is enough?
My question is, what would the stakes be?
I have no idea. I think
if you've already been snubbed, I'm like, I want to go home.
Well, if they win, they
go
get
on a quick
incentive.
vacation for All-Star
I
Weekend.
think they'd also
incentive
get
for winning
walloped.
that? Okay.
I think they'd get walloped.
It depends on how serious they take it.
That's
Yeah.
fair. I think if there was incentive on the line, it could be something they maybe try once and then throw it out the window. Who really knows? And I guess the last thing to do with the All-Star, like I said, it's in Indy. Thoughts on it being in one of the biggest basketball states in the entire country? Zach, I'll start with you with that.
It's fantastic, and Adam Silver's mentioned it a couple of times this season, that going away from the Elam ending and bringing it back to a more traditional style of All-Star game, going back to what he called the home of basketball, the creation of basketball, the birthplace of basketball in Indy, I think that's just fantastic for the sport, and I think we'll see that in a couple of weeks when the All-Star break is here.
I think it'll be really good. Indianapolis is usually a good host city for things. Obviously, it has the Big Ten football championship. And now I want to segue. It's a rule that was established this year with the All-NBA stakes. You have to play a minimum of 65 games to be eligible. Joel Embiid is now out of that with that injury that he sustained. He's out at least 4 weeks. We'll see when he's back. And that was a front runner for MVP. And Zion, I'll start with you. Thoughts on this rule, and do you have a different solution if you don't like it?
So my thoughts on this rule are complicated because I do think players should be rewarded for playing and playing these games. But injuries do happen. When it comes to the awards as far as MVP, Most Improved Player, awards like that, Defensive Player of the Year, I am okay with this rule as far as you have to play 65 games to be eligible because at some point, even if you are as great as Joel Embiid is, it's hard to say he's been the MVP of this season when he's not going to be able to play anywhere near 65 games. But when it comes to the All-NBA awards, which are tied into money and incentives, I think that's a different story. I think those awards are some that maybe you can loosen up the boundaries and the rules of how many games you have to play to make an All-NBA team because it's not as special and specific as winning the MVP, but it's still a big award and it's still tied into player contracts. So that's the way I see it. It's very complicated, but I get where the NBA is coming from with this new rule.
It is interesting because obviously a guy like Tyrese Halliburton, he's on the cusp. I think, 2 more games he can miss for the rest of the season? It's a very small amount for how many games are left. And right now the quality is he's playing 15 to 20 minutes, so he's not really getting his full Tyrese Halliburton experience. Durham, thoughts on the rule?
The players did it to themselves. They asked for this when they stopped playing in the regular season and stopped acting like it matters. If you take it each game as if this is my job, I need to show up, the load management thing enough of that. It's a discredit to the fans who pay their hard-earned money to go to the games and on your jerseys. You have to play. It's your job. It's basketball. It shouldn't be that serious.
Zach?
My counter to that would just simply be, this is kind of an unintended side effect of the rule. I understand load management's not great. Get away with that, and this rule has done that. The issue is you're punishing guys for getting injured, and this is a group of athletes that are playing at the very highest level, exerting tremendous amounts of energy and stress on their bodies. Injuries are going to happen, and you're just punishing guys for getting injured at this point.
I think you can punish in a way, especially with the money aspect of it, like Zion talked about. But in terms of winning regular season awards, that shouldn't matter. Winning a championship should matter. Like, just play the games. It's not, they did it to themselves. I don't really see a world where, a guy should be risking their career to make an All-NBA team.
But in that same vein, if you are a guy who knows your team's going to go into the playoffs, you don't necessarily have to play all 65 games for your team to make the playoffs. Wouldn't it be smarter to take some rest days here and there to make sure you are fully fit and full strength for the playoff run?
I think that's okay at the end of the season, but when you have guys sitting out in November because they played the night before and they don't want to get injured and they're playing Detroit, that's not fair.
Wow, just shots fired at Detroit. That poor city.
You've seen the record.
I know, but that poor city. But that's going to wrap up the first segment. We'll be back. Don't go anywhere. We're going to discuss some of the standings, what's at stake for the back half of the season. So we will be right back on the toss-up. Welcome back to the toss-up. It's the NBA discussion. We spent some time discussing the 65-game rule. Obviously, tempers can get a little high discussing that, whether it's right, wrong, what's the best solution. But now I want to keep things a little more light, talk about what's at stake in the NBA right now and what's headed for the backstretch of the season, All-Star break, and beyond. And I'll start right now. Who is the most dangerous team in the NBA? Darren, I'll go to you first with this one.
It's hard to think of anybody other than the Denver Nuggets.
Okay.
Reigning champions, best starting five in the NBA. There's a lot of teams at the top of the West right now. I have a feeling one of you are going to say the Clippers, and I think it might be you. But it's hard to beat that when it comes to the postseason. And with the experience that they built as a collective last year, they're tied for first place right now. And they still haven't even had the best season I think that they could have. They're in a good spot, and I think they'll be in the top of the West when
That
it's all
team
said and
always
done.
fascinates me. I mean, Jokic is such an interesting player to watch. Obviously, one, if not the best player in the world currently, and just the things he does, chucks up a shot like that, beating the shot clock buzzer beater. And they're one of the slowest teams. They're 29th in pace in the NBA. I find that very interesting. They just kind of work at their own tempo.
Yeah.
I think what Malone has done is very solid. Zion.
The Clippers were a team I was considering. I will say.
Really called
Close
them out
enough.
for that.
I will
close enough,
say.
Close enough.
But I'm going to go with the Cleveland Cavaliers. This is a team right now, JB Bickerstaff has that squad playing really good basketball, and they've dealt with injuries all season long. Now, in the next couple weeks, Darius Garland just came back. Eventually, Evan Mobley will be back, and they'll have their sort of big four, so to speak, all back in the lineup to go with Max Strus, to go with Isaac Okoro, to go with Dean Wade. All those guys are good complementary role players. I think that team is capable. I don't know if I want to go as far as to say they can win the East, but I don't see why they couldn't at least make the conference finals. I really do think that is one of the more complete teams in the NBA, and right now they're playing just as well as anybody besides the Clippers.
It's really hard to ignore the fact that they've won 14 out of the last 15
Yeah.
back.
I'm going to go with the Oklahoma City Thunder out in the West. That's a team, they're fun to watch. And when you're in a playoff setting with the Thunder, you've got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. He's going to be one of the best players on the floor pretty much night in and night out in a playoff series. There might be 3 or 4 teams in the entire league that can say they have the better player when they're playing Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. He's that good. And when you've got Jalen Williams playing the way that he is, you've got just a lot of talent on that team. And They're tied atop the West for a reason. I think they're a very dangerous team. They've got nothing to lose. They're so young. They're going to be here for the next half a decade, so they've got nothing to lose in a playoff setting.
That is true, and I think that could make a first-round team pretty nervous when you're facing a team like the Thunder. But I do have to ask, with a team like that that's young, so young, has a very limited playoff experience, will that come into play come April?
Yes, probably, with a little bit of the roster. But again, I go back to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. The playoff experience the lack of playoff experience, I should say, doesn't necessarily scare me when I'm talking about Shai because he's just that good.
Now, last season, we got to witness Jimmy Butler do Jimmy Butler things once again. There's something about he just flips his switch, has his little emo haircut or whatever you want to call it. Sorry. He even said it himself. And him at Media Days is an anomaly, and it's kind of fun. I love the way he takes it not serious at all. But I want to talk about sleeper teams, someone that's not going to be in the top 4, maybe 5 and beyond, even a play-in team. Who knows if a play-in team is able to make that kind of run again? Zach, right back to you. Does a sleeper team, whether the Pacers, something like that, I'll call them out right now. I know you've been thinking about them.
We all know who I'm going to talk about. It's the Indiana Pacers. Tyrese Halliburton, he's not in that same echelon yet as Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, but when he steps on the floor in a postseason setting, he's that guy. He's a guy that can go give you 35 and 15 in a playoff game, and the Pacers have already done it.
Has he proved that, though?
The in-season tournament, I'd argue he has proved it. The beginning of the season, I'd argue that he has proved it as well.
Guess we're using that as a marker for success
he's
now.
Starting the All-Star game in the East for a reason. I'll just say that.
Durham, you kind of shrug your shoulders when you mentioned Tyrese. Like, what do you have against Halliburton?
I don't have anything against
the NBA
a phenomenal
assists,
player.
and that's something you can't ignore.
Exactly. I mean, he's a phenomenal player. I think it's a different level when you're in the postseason and in the playoffs in the NBA. It's a different league. It's a different environment. It's a different game. I think he'll have good numbers, but I don't know if he can will the team to a series win.
But they also just added a guy who has an NBA championship, too.
Pascal Siakam, yes, that was early on in his career, but I don't think he's that vocal leader that they're going to need come playoff time.
That's fair. I think they're one of the younger teams as well. It's kind of young and fun. Durham, though, sleeper team.
Lakers. You can never bet against LeBron James in the playoffs. If they get into the play-in, it's going to be tough to pick against them in a 7-game series.
I mean, they might be able to, pick off that first round. I think when it matters the most, he's 39, 38, whatever it is.
Last year they made it to the Western Finals.
And really stood no chance against the Nuggets.
They didn't get closer than it looked, but
they didn't give him much of a fight.
Yeah.
Zion, sleeper team.
That was what I was considering. I mean, because of what they've done in the playoffs. I'll go to what you talked about. I'll say the Heat and Jimmy Butler. I mean, every year it feels like, not every year, they were the 1 seed a couple years ago, but most of the time it feels like we just ignore this team in the regular season. And then out of nowhere, we're like, man, how are they doing so well in the playoffs? It's because they've been there, they know what they do, and they have the best coach in the NBA in Eric Spoelstra. I would not be surprised to see that team win a round or two again in the playoffs and really make some noise.
Do you think Rozier gets them over the hump?
I think he helps. I don't know if he's going to be, the X factor, but I think with adding Terry Rozier, you have him and Tyler Hero. You can count on one of those guys probably having a big night. Before, when you just had Tyler Hero, if he had a bad night, your offense was going to struggle. Now you can maybe add Terry Rozier to that and say one of those two is going to get hot because that's the type of players they are.
Greg Popovich is still a coach in the NBA.
Have you seen Greg Popovich's record?
His team
is not good.
His team is terrible.
The roster?
Yeah, but I feel like you can't argue with what Greg Popovich's resume is.
Yeah, I mean,
he won 67 games with DeMar DeRozan and LaMarcus Aldridge.
You can say he's one of the best coaches ever, but right now, if we're playing a pickup basketball game, when we go to the Bill Garrett later today, if Eric Spoelstra walked in and Greg Popovich walked in, I would
rather have Spo than a Greg Popovich. And before we wrap it up, I just want to know who's meeting in the NBA Finals. Got a little sidetrack there, Zion. I'll make this one a little snappy too.
All right, I will talk about my Clippers. I'm going to say they make it there because
Your Clippers.
I've adopted them in this show. I'll say the Clippers and the Celtics end up meeting in the NBA Finals. Two teams that have both felt like they've come so close lately. I think they finally both make it there at the same time.
Nuggets, Celtics. I like Boston, most talented team in the league. I think they get past, the hiccup they had in the Eastern Finals last year, and then I think Denver runs it back. I think it'll be a good series, though.
I think that would be one of the better ones to look out for.
Typically, I'd just choose something random to be different here,
Choose the T-Wolves.
but I can't. I'm going to go with the Celtics and the Clippers in this one. I just think those are the two best teams in the league talent-wise, and I think they've played like that as of late.
I don't think you can count on Russell Westbrook and Kawhi Leonard, especially
Kawhi
with
Leonard
their
you can
injury.
count on in the
The
playoffs.
Kawhi
injury-
Leonard
the
you can count on
injury
the
history.
playoffs.
The injury history.
That's
I
what
don't
scares
know
me
if
the
his-
most.
I don't know if his body can go through 4 rounds, potentially going to 7 games. I don't think it's going to work that way for him.
That's what Paul George and James Harden are for.
I like how you mentioned our intramural game. There's huge playoff implications happening. Obviously, the game will happen, and then this show will be posted, so they're not going to really overlap at all. But, yeah, we'll see the next time I'm on this show what my reaction is going to be. But that's going to do it for this week's show. Be sure to follow along with our Instagram and Twitter at TheTossUp23 and at TheTossUpIU, respectively, as well as at IUSTV Sports on both platforms. There's one thing left to do and to bring it back. Got to shut the notebook so pages don't rip. Toss it up. Oh, I caught it. We'll see you next time.